Picture a quiet evening. You're texting her, the one you've been investing so much effort to win over. But each reply grows shorter, colder. Plans get postponed. Then one day, she vanishes from your life without a word. We often ask ourselves, what did I do wrong? But the answer doesn't lie in outward actions. It rests in something subtler, the quiet weakness we unknowingly emit. Women sense this more keenly than we imagine. It's not about appearance, status, or wealth. It's about inner strength, the very foundation of true attraction for those of us who walk the Stoic path. If you've ever felt disregarded, dismissed, or disrespected in a relationship, it's time to turn inward. This isn't a message of blame. It's a wake-up call. Today we'll uncover 7 signs that women sense weakness in you, and how to confront each one with the cold clarity and quiet power of Stoic wisdom. 1. Your emotions control you, not the other way around. One of the clearest signs a man is losing control is the intensity and speed of his emotional reactions to trivial situations. Impulsive reactions are not only a visible symptom of mental fragility, but also a sign of a mind governed by external forces rather than guided by internal principles. In reality, these reactions often go unnoticed. A man may not slam the table, raise his voice, or throw objects, yet impulsive emotion reveals itself through behavior. Hastily texting just to seek explanation, calling repeatedly when feeling abandoned, abrupt mood swings when ignored, or making rash decisions to strike back from a place of emotional hurt. These actions often stem from a false belief that emotions are absolute truths. When a man feels wounded, he assumes that feeling must be addressed immediately, with action, words, or attitude. But reacting instantly creates a cascade of consequences beyond his control. Fractured relationships, a diminished self-image, and a gradual erosion of respect from the woman. A woman doesn't view your emotions with maternal empathy, like a mother watching a child throw a tantrum. She perceives them through a biologically wired instinct for stability. And what is erratic, hasty, or unrestrained is sensed as unsafe. On a subconscious level, she envisions a broader scenario. If he can't control his emotions in small matters, how can he protect a family when life gets truly difficult? Impulsiveness also means placing emotional urgency above principle. When a man acts out simply because he's hurt, angry, or afraid, he often forgets that behavior must align with values, not serve fleeting impulses. Here, values aren't measured by how deeply you feel, but by how firmly you uphold them, especially under pressure. Stoicism regards impulsiveness as the symptom of an undisciplined mind. A mind untrained will be tossed about by every gust of external events, a seen but unanswered message, a missed call, a cryptic remark, an unexplained silence. Each is a gust of wind, and without deep roots, a man will sway with every breeze. Training to respond instead of react begins with awareness. Realize that emotions are not commands, they are signals. A man's duty is not to obey those signals, but to decide how to act on them with resolve and principle. When a man learns to stop letting emotion dictate behavior, he begins to reshape his essence. Women and the world sense this shift because a calm man doesn't need to prove himself. He stands like a rock amid a raging current, and that stillness is more compelling than any show of words or actions. In the modern world, where relationships are tangled, and emotions flare fast. Many men attempt to manufacture calm as a social skill. They try to stay composed when insulted, indifferent to challenges, unfazed. But if that calm is merely a mask for saving face, pleasing someone, or avoiding conflict, then it is not true composure, but a coping tactic. Temperament, in the Stoic sense, is not what you perform in public. It is the internal character, hardened over time, steady even when no one is watching. True composure belongs to temperament. It reflects depth of self-mastery, steadiness of spirit, and a man's ability to hold his ground. Temporary skills work only in ideal conditions. When things go smoothly, pressure is low, and the other person is cooperative. But when the setting shifts, when she grows distant, tests limits, or goes silent, skills fall apart if they're not grounded in solid thought. That's why some men seem calm during the first few weeks of dating, but lose control when confronted by rejection or silence. By contrast, genuine composure is not reliant on external peace. It doesn't need others to play along. A man of character remains stable in tone, gaze, and action, even when criticized, when plans fall apart, or when provoked. His calm is not for show. It is the natural outcome of an inner world, trained not to chase after emotion. In Stoicism, composure is the highest form of self-possession. A man who doesn't flinch is not cold. He is clear. He knows what lies within his control and what does not. When she snaps, withdraws, shifts, or tests him, he doesn't get pulled into emotional games. He sees what's happening and chooses to respond on his own terms, not hers. Real composure can't be faked. It's built on many things: disciplined thinking, consistency in values, objective observation, and full acceptance of reality. A calm man is one who isn't undone by expectations. He doesn't overreact because someone fails to meet his desires. Instead, he greets change as inevitable and focuses only on his own response. This is why composure is not a tool to manage moments, but a durable armor that protects a man's identity amid chaos. It signals to women that no matter the storms outside, this man remains a source of stability for himself and for others. True attraction doesn't come from flashy behavior. It radiates from one's inner energy. And when composure becomes part of your being, it's a silent but irresistible force. It shows that you don't live in reaction, but in choice, not led by others' emotions, but by your inner compass. 2. You fear rejection more than losing yourself. The fear of rejection isn't just a fleeting emotion in social or romantic settings. At its core, it reflects a deep-rooted mindset that places one's self-worth in the hands of others, particularly in their approval. When a man believes he has value only if a woman accepts him, likes him, or responds positively, then his entire self-esteem and identity are built on something he cannot control. Evaluating yourself through another's eyes distorts how you behave in relationships. A man in this mindset constantly monitors the other's reactions, her expressions, tone, the frequency of her replies, as though every detail is living proof of whether he is accepted. When a message goes unanswered or a conversation doesn't unfold as hoped, his mind shifts into high alert, spinning negative interpretations, often blowing things out of proportion. In Stoic thought, this is the textbook case of letting the uncontrollable rule the inner life. One of the core tenets of Stoicism is the clear distinction between what lies within our control and what does not. Our responses, our choices, our behavior, those are ours to command. But the emotions, opinions, and decisions of others, those lie outside our domain. When a man lets someone else's mood or judgment define his worth, he's handed over his mental account to another, and now lives in fragility, in reaction, and in fear. Fear of rejection also breeds self-censorship. A man may hesitate to speak his mind, withhold his desires, or avoid setting clear boundaries, worried that any expression of his individuality might drive her away. Ironically, this avoidance often backfires. The lack of conviction makes a man appear vague, weightless, and gradually strips away the natural magnetism that comes from standing firm. On a deeper level, dependency on others' approval forms a vicious psychological loop. The more a man craves validation, the more he fears rejection. The more he fears rejection, the more inauthentic his behavior becomes. And the more inauthentic he is, the more he's seen as weak, thus increasing the chance of actual rejection. This spiral traps a man in constant anxiety, haunted by questions like, am I good enough? Am I worth keeping? What must I do to avoid being left? These questions don't arise from inner awareness, but from an obsession with how others might judge. Stoicism offers a radically different path. Your worth isn't determined by approval, but by your alignment with principle. When a man understands that rejection is natural, a neutral result of two differing individuals, he no longer sees it as an attack on his existence. Acceptance or rejection doesn't diminish one's value unless he allows it to. Therefore, if left unchecked, fear of rejection not only erodes confidence, it undermines decisiveness, muddles communication, and distorts authenticity in relationships. But when a man stops living to avoid rejection and starts living in alignment with his thoughts and values, he reclaims mastery over his inner world, a cornerstone of true, lasting attraction. In any relationship, the desire for acceptance is human, but when that desire mutates into a desperate fear of rejection, it can push a man to betray the very values, principles, and morals he once held. This quiet compromise is one of the main reasons self-respect erodes and identity fades. A man driven by fear of rejection no longer acts based on belief or internal standards. Instead, he measures everything by a single question: will this make her leave? And so, he filters all self-expression through a lens called social safety. He agrees instead of challenging, yields instead of setting boundaries, stays silent instead of speaking truth, all in an effort to avoid conflict or discomfort. Over time, this breeds inner conflict. His outer actions no longer match his inner self. The man grows uncomfortable with who he's become, but can't stop for fear of losing the relationship or being judged. And with every step away from principle to dodge rejection, he cuts off another piece of his identity. Stoicism sees this as a severe deviation from moral discipline. In its philosophy, a person's worth isn't measured by how much others like him, but by how honestly he lives according to his internal code. If a man constantly reshapes himself to match outside expectations, he loses touch with his essence, and with it, long-term self-respect. Worse yet, in trying to hold on to the relationship by yielding and changing to avoid rejection, the tragic irony is this: he becomes less attractive. With each compromise of his values, the energy he emits shifts from "I know who I am" to "I only exist if you accept me." And in romantic dynamics, attraction doesn't spring from blind compliance, but from clarity and conviction. This betrayal of self also leads to a crisis of direction. Lacking firm standards to guide him, the man becomes passive and confused during conflict. When he no longer knows what he truly believes, he begins to act out of reflex instead of conscious choice. And when reflex becomes habit, fear-driven behavior replaces principled action, a weak, unreliable default. Stoic philosophy delivers a sharp warning. Every time you abandon your principles to avoid rejection, you surrender part of your inner sovereignty. Rejection may be unpleasant, but living in artificial harmony exacts a far greater toll. Rejection, if it comes, is a chance to affirm your stance, while false peace only delays the inevitable rupture. Thus, to maintain respect from others and from oneself, a man must learn to prioritize his values over fear of loss. Only when outward actions reflect inward convictions can one achieve alignment of body, mind, and spirit. And from that alignment flows the energy of a whole, trustworthy, and truly magnetic human being. 3. You chase instead of attracting. In a relationship, taking the initiative to show interest is natural. However, when initiative turns into persistent pursuit, clinging, or an effort to maintain attention at all costs, it often reflects a deeper psychological state, one of lack and insecurity. This isn't merely a fleeting personal feeling, but a systematic behavioral pattern formed by tying self-worth to another's response. A man in this state often doesn't realize that his actions, like constant texting, canceling personal plans to meet up, or striving to make an impression, don't arise from a desire to be authentic, but from fear of being forgotten, rejected, or replaced. He doesn't act from a position of intrinsic worth, but from the belief that he must do something to be noticed, to be worthy of attention. At its core, chasing behavior isn't just a communication strategy, it's a psychological reflex. When a man feels insecure about his own value, he tries to compensate through action, hoping that if he does enough, he'll receive validation from the woman. But because these actions stem from internal instability, they often create the opposite result from what he intended. In Stoic philosophy, one of the central principles is to not be governed by what lies beyond our control. Attention, affection, or another's feelings all belong to the realm of the uncontrollable. Therefore, trying to hold on to someone's attention by chasing it is an act that contradicts the Stoic ideal of inner mastery. It shows that the man is allowing external factors to dictate his worth and inner peace. Internal insecurity also makes a man emotionally reactive when he doesn't receive the expected response. For example, if she doesn't reply right away or doesn't initiate plans, the chasing man quickly falls into anxiety, doubt, even self-blame. His next move is often to intensify the pursuit, calling more often, writing longer messages, or trying to make peace, even when no conflict occurred. These actions don't strengthen the relationship. Instead, they weaken the image of stability and self-control, two core elements of genuine attraction. Moreover, sustained pursuit tends to create a lopsided relationship where one side gives endlessly and the other passively receives. This puts the man in a position where he's constantly working to be worthy of affection, rather than building a relationship based on equality and mutual respect. Over time, this imbalance makes the woman feel less valued in the connection, and the man feel exhausted from maintaining something that was never freely given. Stoicism doesn't encourage seeking value from the outside. Instead, it emphasizes building inner worth through actions aligned with reason and principle. When a man acts more from fear of losing attention than from living by his values, he draws closer to emotional instability, the very condition Stoicism aims to transcend, not tolerate. Thus, chasing, even when disguised as love, is the result of a mind untrained in tolerating uncertainty, which is an unavoidable part of any real relationship. When a man learns to accept that others' attention doesn't determine his value, only then can he stop chasing and begin to live as someone who truly attracts. In personal relationships, attraction isn't just about appearance, communication skills, or surface-level charm. A deeper, often invisible factor is the energy emitted by someone who possesses inner depth and self-direction. True attraction doesn't arise from calculated behaviors. It flows naturally from living with purpose, principle, and self-control. In Stoic philosophy, self-mastery is among the highest expressions of human capacity. A man is seen as possessing presence when he doesn't live in reaction, but by rational choice. This means his words, actions, and decisions aren't shaped by others' expectations or passing emotions, but are guided by an internally defined value system. This purposeful way of living is the foundation of attraction. When a man knows what matters to him, what's worth pursuing, and what can be let go, he emits stable energy. That energy is expressed through consistency in behavior, calm in conflict, and the ability to hold firm even under challenge. These are traits that others, especially women, can naturally feel without needing explanation. Unlike chasing, which arises from the need for approval, true attraction carries no expectation. A man who possesses it doesn't act to be liked. He acts because that behavior reflects who he is. When outer actions align with inner beliefs, others feel authenticity, an essential ingredient for trust and safety in any relationship. Furthermore, inner growth is irreplaceable in developing lasting attraction. When a man continually evolves, mentally, physically, skillfully, and consciously, he doesn't need to seek attention. His way of existing, working, behaving, and choosing already reflects a high standard of living. And in a world where true value grows scarce, that kind of progress becomes magnetic, attracting those with similar depth. The element of self-discipline also plays a key role in sustaining attraction. A self-governed man not only knows how to say yes to what aligns with him, but more importantly, how to say no to what contradicts his path. His ability to set and maintain personal boundaries proves he isn't swayed by emotional cravings or temporary desires. This creates a durable form of magnetism, an attraction born from strength in a world full of volatility. Stoic philosophy emphasizes that attraction can't be chased like a goal in isolation. It only arises as a byproduct of living in line with one's values. In other words, attraction isn't a destination, but a logical consequence of self-cultivation, a continuous process unaffected by praise, blame, or short-term results. When a man stops chasing attention and begins living as though he needs no recognition, that's often when he becomes more visible. Not because he tries to be, but because others are drawn to his calm, his clarity, and his consistency. This isn't social skill, it's temperament, forged over time through discipline, persistence, and loyalty to self. 4. You complain but don't act. In personal life and relationships, complaining is often seen as a natural reaction to unmet expectations. However, from a Stoic perspective, complaining is not merely the expression of negative emotions. It's a subtle defense mechanism that helps one avoid personal responsibility. Instead of facing the issue directly and acting to improve it, the complainer shifts blame to external forces, others, circumstances, or society, to justify inner dissatisfaction. When a man feels rejected, disrespected, or falls short of what he desires in a relationship, he easily slips into complaint. Phrases like, "Women today are too materialistic," "I was kind yet no one chose me," or "They only want the bad guys," are classic examples. On the surface, these sound like social observations. In truth, they reflect an unwillingness to ask deeper questions about one's own role and behavior. Stoic philosophy is clear. What lies beyond your control, others' thoughts, emotions, or behavior, is not worth complaining about. Instead, the only rightful focus is on your own mindset, actions, and responses. When someone complains that others don't meet their expectations, it reveals that they've centered their life on what cannot be controlled. This shows not only a distorted view of reality, but also a lack of inner discipline. The psychology behind complaining is the desire to relieve emotional tension without making any change. Complaining brings short-term comfort because it gives the illusion that the problem lies out there, not within. But this comfort is temporary and produces no growth. The real problem remains while the inner self gets trapped in a cycle of frustration. Moreover, complaining tends to repeat and solidify into a mental rut. Once a man becomes used to finding fault in others, he gradually loses the ability to self-reflect. He stops asking, "What can I improve? Am I living by my principles?" Instead, he revolves around questions that blame others. At that point, complaining is no longer surface-level expression. It becomes a habit that erases one's role in personal development and change. Complaining also creates emotional distance in relationships. When a man continually expresses negativity without offering solutions or taking action, others begin to sense a stagnant energy. Rather than generating empathy, he is seen as someone lacking problem-solving ability or the will to act. In the context of attraction and trust, this undermines his image, especially in romantic settings. Stoicism teaches that instead of complaining, we should redirect that energy into action, aligned with our inner values. When faced with rejection rather than blame, a man should ask, "Are my behaviors consistent with my principles? Can my approach be improved? Is my current reaction helping me become better?" At its core, complaining is not honesty. It's a subtle form of avoiding the responsibility to own your life. A Stoic thinker doesn't complain because he understands that every event is a chance to forge character. And each time he resists the urge to blame, he steps closer to true self-mastery, the kind of strength no words can substitute. In any philosophy that values personal growth, action is the ultimate measure of transformation. Stoicism is no exception. In fact, Stoic thought places action at the center, as living proof of whether a person truly understands, internalizes, and lives by the principles he claims to follow. A man might read dozens of books, attend inspirational talks, or reflect daily. But if nothing changes in how he responds to adversity, navigates relationships, or makes decisions, then all that knowledge remains theoretical. Only when ideals are translated into action can real transformation be confirmed. From a Stoic view, action doesn't have to be grand. It may begin with small things, staying silent at the right moment, consistently practicing a good habit, refusing what violates your values, or responding calmly in emotionally charged situations. Each such act, however simple, reasserts your role as the sovereign over your inner life. Action is also what separates two men in the same situation. Both may face rejection, loss, or failure. But if one complains while the other gets to work improving himself, the difference between them is not what happened, but how they chose to respond. In Stoic thought, that choice is the beginning of inner strength, not found in circumstances, but in how one chooses to meet them. Another important point: action creates a compounding effect. Each decision to act, even a small one, rebuilds a man's self-image. When a man consistently acts in line with his principles, he forms a new identity, not as someone easily shaken, but as someone who knows what's right and does it, even when it's uncomfortable. Over time, this new self-image changes how he speaks to himself, how he chooses, and how others perceive him. In relationships, action functions as a silent language that reveals inner value. When a man says he's working on himself, but continues the same reactive, boundaryless, uncentered behavior, his words lose weight. In contrast, a man who says nothing, but shows calm, consistency, and direction, his behavior alone speaks of growth and strength. Stoicism rejects any philosophy that's all talk and no action. It demands that the practitioner confront who he truly is by how he lives every single day. There's no room for excuses, delays, or empty promises. Action is the essence. It is where ideals hit the ground and are tested in the real world. If a man wants respect, growth, and to become his best version, then he must act accordingly, every day, without exception. Therefore, in Stoic thought, action is not just a result of thought. It is the only proof that thought exists at all. Without action, every noble idea is nothing more than untapped potential, and no one, not even the man himself, can build a life on potential alone. 5. You abandon your goals just to please her. In many relationships, especially during the early stages of emotional attachment, men often feel compelled to prove their affection by prioritizing the woman above everything else, including the important goals they've set for themselves. At first, this behavior might appear romantic or thoughtful, but if it becomes a repeated pattern where the man consistently postpones his personal aims to accommodate someone else's feelings, then it is no longer care, but a quiet betrayal of his own life direction. From a Stoic standpoint, human life only holds real meaning when guided by reason, principle, and clear purpose. Each individual is responsible for choosing a path, committing to a purpose, and acting in alignment with that internal commitment. To abandon one's personal goals in exchange for another's temporary comfort, even under the pretext of maintaining the relationship, is to deviate from that responsibility. One of the first consequences of repeatedly sacrificing life goals is the erosion of personal direction. When a man halts long-term pursuits like career growth, physical training, intellectual development, or daily discipline for fear that these things might make her feel less prioritized, he begins to lose consistency in his identity. While the relationship might temporarily feel smoother, in the long run, he will feel empty, unmotivated, and disconnected from himself. Furthermore, living according to someone else's expectations weakens the ability to make independent decisions. When a man habitually adjusts his actions to suit another's emotions, he gradually blurs the line between what he wants and what he should do. This creates psychological dependence, where every decision, from simple scheduling to major career shifts, is driven by fear of losing the relationship rather than guided by principled thinking. This behavioral drift inevitably undermines self-respect. The man starts to believe he's loved not for who he is, but for what he's willing to surrender. That imbalance breeds a quiet anxiety that without continued self-sacrifice, the connection won't last. Such a relationship is no longer built on equality. It becomes a form of emotional transaction where one side trades away ideals to preserve attachment. Stoic philosophy insists that nothing is more valuable than loyalty to the path reason has chosen. True attraction doesn't come from sacrificing everything, but from the energy of someone who won't be pulled off course by fleeting emotional pressure. The man who has clear goals, acts consistently, and refuses to trade direction for approval is living as nature intended for a rational and self-governing being. Therefore, sacrificing personal goals cannot be considered a virtue if it leads to lost direction, identity, and vitality. In any healthy relationship, personal growth should not be diminished in order to preserve temporary harmony. On the contrary, true companionship is built upon two independent individuals growing in parallel, without requiring the other to abandon themselves just to stay connected. One of the clearest signs of a man with inner depth is the ability to define and commit to personal purpose. That purpose isn't limited to material goals like career, finances, or accomplishments. It also includes moral direction, spiritual ideals, and how he intends to show up in the world. When a person lives with defined purpose, every behavior, choice, and response is filtered through a coherent value system. This produces a steady kind of energy, one that is easily felt and naturally attractive. From the Stoic perspective, humans are rational beings, and purposeful presence is living proof that one is using reason as intended. A man may not be the wealthiest, most successful, or socially skilled, but if he is clearly on a purposeful path, that journey gives him psychological stability. This confidence comes not from outcome, but from knowing that his direction is right and justified. In relationships, this has a profound effect on how a man is perceived. When his goals are clear, he is not easily swayed by another's passing emotions. This doesn't mean he is cold or uncaring. It means he places emotions within the larger framework of life, rather than allowing them to control decisions. In doing so, he assumes the role of quiet leadership, not through words, but through behavioral steadiness. That steadiness is what inspires trust in those beside him. Additionally, a man with purpose tends to make decisions with long-term vision, not driven by short-term pressure or the need for instant approval. He's willing to say no to attractive but misaligned options because he knows what deserves pursuit and what is merely distraction. This decisiveness doesn't stem from rigidity, but from a deep understanding of his personal priorities. This is what separates the reactive from the grounded and what makes consistency a source of inspiration. Another key trait: a man with purpose doesn't need to prove himself through words. He lets action speak. In conversation, he doesn't try to please or seek validation, but communicates directly, clearly, and with relevance. Emotionally, this creates a safe environment, one where others feel guided, not coerced, because they sense that he can hold steady, even in chaos. Stoic thought also teaches that self-governance paired with direction is the foundation of true freedom. When a man no longer scrambles to please others or shape himself to be liked, he gains inner space for deep growth. Unbound by changing emotions or social pressure, he operates by an internal compass, one that doesn't shift with circumstance. That's why he becomes someone others can trust, respect, and want to walk beside. Thus, a man with clear goals isn't just someone who knows what he wants. He's someone who knows what he won't trade to be accepted. That's what creates the energy of leadership, not from status or power, but from the ability to stay true to himself, no matter how the world moves around him. 6. You apologize for everything, even when you don't have to. An apology, when used appropriately, is a civilized way to acknowledge fault, showing respect for others and a willingness to improve. However, when apologies are excessive, especially in situations where there is no clear fault or none at all, this behavior no longer reflects responsibility, but becomes an emotional defense mechanism. The psychology behind over-apologizing often stems from a fear of rejection or negative judgment. In romantic or social contexts, a man may believe that taking blame, even when undeserved, will preserve stability, ease tension, or increase the likelihood of being liked. But in truth, this behavior reflects emotional dependency and a desire for approval at any cost. Stoic philosophy sees this as a clear sign of surrendering inner control to external forces. When a person adjusts his words, attitude, or even his sense of right and wrong just to align with someone else's emotions or expectations, he's no longer living by his own reason. Instead, he is driven by insecurity and seeks validation from what lies beyond his control. The consequences of over-apologizing go beyond how others perceive him as lacking confidence. It directly affects self-respect and identity. When a person habitually accepts blame unnecessarily, he unconsciously defines himself as always wrong, trouble-causing, or not good enough. Even if these beliefs are never said aloud, the repeated act of apologizing creates a negative internal narrative that slowly undermines emotional and behavioral autonomy. Inappropriate apologies also shift the power dynamic in relationships. In romantic or professional settings, if one person is always the one saying sorry, while the other naturally assumes the role of the one with the right to blame, the relationship tilts toward dependency. This erodes equality and leaves the man unable to set clear boundaries, a critical component of lasting respect and stability. Another concern is that apologizing when there is no fault devalues genuine apologies. If sorry is repeated often, without specific accountability, it becomes hollow and loses its moral weight. By contrast, a timely, meaningful apology, coupled with corrective action, is a clear sign of character and integrity. According to Stoic principles, one must distinguish between what lies within their control and what doesn't. Others' emotions, attitudes, and satisfaction levels are outside of that control. When a person uses apologies as a way to manage others' feelings, he is trading away internal sovereignty for short-term comfort, without recognizing the long-term cost, a diminished sense of self. In essence, an apology not rooted in actual responsibility reflects a deeper need to be accepted and to avoid rejection. When this becomes habitual, it weakens both how others perceive the man and how he perceives himself. In Stoic thinking, a rational, dignified, and self-directed life requires intentional language, including apologies that reflect objective truth and appropriate context. In modern social interactions, saying sorry has almost become a conversational reflex. Yet when it's used unconsciously, out of place, or without genuine accountability, it doesn't strengthen relationships, it weakens personal credibility. A Stoic-informed alternative is to replace unconscious apologies with deliberate expressions of appreciation and a quiet self-respect. Gratitude, in this context, is a positive form of response that honors the experience and feelings of others without devaluing oneself. Instead of saying, "Sorry I'm late," when caught in traffic for reasons beyond control, one might say, "Thank you for your patience." This still communicates respect and courtesy, but without implying unnecessary guilt when none is due. This shift in language reflects awareness, something Stoic philosophy emphasizes deeply. We are responsible not only for actions, but for the impact of our words on our self-image and our relationships. Intentional speech shows that a person acts based on principle, not emotion. That is a clear expression of self-governance, one of the core pillars of a rational life. Gratitude also helps maintain relational balance, preventing one person from becoming the permanent apologizer, while the other holds the default right to critique. When a man shows appreciation instead of unwarranted guilt, he remains courteous, yet retains initiative in the conversation. This redefines how others view him, not as someone easily swayed by feelings, but as someone who acts with reason and confidence. Furthermore, self-respect functions as a filter for how one chooses to respond. Self-respect is not stubbornness. It is clear awareness of personal worth and non-negotiable boundaries. A man with self-respect does not apologize for things he hasn't done wrong, just to create a momentary sense of peace. He understands that if an apology doesn't arise from true accountability, it dilutes the meaning of his word over time. In Stoic thought, both words and actions must reflect internal truth. An apology should only be offered when one's behavior has genuinely harmed another or violated ethical principle. In all other cases, especially those shaped by ambiguity or external factors, one should respond with calm clarity, through gratitude, acknowledgement, or a clear restatement of facts, without self-deprecation. Replacing apology with gratitude is also a way of reclaiming intentionality in communication. The man no longer speaks or acts from a place of seeking forgiveness, but from a position of mutual respect and balanced understanding. This builds trust and creates a more stable foundation for relationships where both parties feel heard, yet no one has to surrender dignity to be accepted. Ultimately, this shift from unconscious apology to intentional gratitude is a mark of emotional mastery and principled speech. It's not just a social skill, it's a practical expression of Stoic philosophy in daily life, where every word serves not only as communication, but as evidence of inner strength and maturity. 7. You constantly seek validation. In a society driven by image, reputation, and public approval, the need to be validated by others has become an invisible norm. However, when one relies too heavily on external recognition to feel valuable, this behavior shifts from being a positive motivator to becoming an invisible cage, one that restricts personal identity and trades away inner freedom. Stoic philosophy draws a clear line between two domains: what lies within our control and what lies outside it. Our thoughts, behaviors, and choices are within our control, while others' emotions, judgments, and approval are not. When a person begins to act in pursuit of validation instead of reason and principle, he surrenders agency, trading the role of navigator for that of follower. One of the clearest consequences of dependency on validation is the blurring of personal boundaries. When a man no longer knows what truly matters to him, he becomes prone to saying yes to everything, even when it violates his values or derails long-term goals. He may stay in places he's outgrown, hold on to toxic relationships, or keep jobs that feel meaningless, simply because he fears that saying no will cost him admiration. Over time, this erodes identity. When a man acts not from internal conviction, but from fear of losing approval, he loses the ability to define himself. Every small decision, how he dresses, speaks in public, or responds to conflict, is distorted by the question, "What will others think?" Instead of asking, "Is this right for me?" he constantly asks, "Will this please them?" There is nothing more dangerous than living a life where the center of gravity lies outside oneself. When others' opinions become the compass, a person becomes reactive, easily manipulated, and likely to compromise when values collide. This leads not only to emotional instability, but to a disconnect from the self, since there's no fixed internal framework to hold on to. Stoicism teaches that one can only live freely when no longer bound to what cannot be controlled, including validation. The Stoic practitioner learns to draw clear boundaries, knowing what must be protected and what mustn't be bargained with. This doesn't mean living coldly or in isolation. It means living with inner honesty and rational direction. When one knows what truly matters, he gains the power to reject distractions, even if they come from loved ones, friends, or society. Losing personal direction is the long-term consequence when external validation continues to dictate behavior. A person who no longer knows what he wants, only what others expect, eventually lives by someone else's schedule, priorities, and goals. Over time, deep dissatisfaction sets in, a sense of conflict, low motivation, and growing detachment from a meaningful life. In any process of personal growth, re-establishing boundaries and re-centralizing one's focus is a necessary starting point. This demands courage, not to live for validation, but for what truly matters. According to Stoicism, this is the foundation of self-possession, the ability to remain loyal to personal values in a world that constantly demands compromise for approval. Humans are social beings. The desire for recognition and approval is natural. It's rooted in our instincts to belong and connect. But when that desire becomes excessive and the primary driver of action, it ceases to be healthy connection and becomes a symptom of an unstable inner world and an undefined personal value system. Often, men don't realize that much of what they choose, from words to behaviors and relationships, is calibrated for one goal: external approval. He may feel he only has worth when praised, noticed, or affirmed by the woman he's interested in. When those signals vanish, he slips into self-doubt, feelings of invisibility, or emotional abandonment. From a Stoic perspective, this is life without rational foundation. The Stoic believes a person's real value doesn't stem from outside opinions, but from living in alignment with moral principles, intentional action, and integrity in every condition. If self-worth depends on others' reactions, he has denied his own power to define himself, which is central to the Stoic concept of autonomy. The first sign of validation dependence is emotional and behavioral instability. When external feedback changes, when criticized, ignored, or insufficiently recognized, the man becomes disoriented, insecure, or reactive. Meanwhile, when praised, he becomes euphoric, treating it as proof of his real value. Letting emotions rise and fall with others' responses is a sign that internal value has not been solidified. Another problem tied to the need for validation is the sacrifice of principles for approval. A man may agree with things he doesn't believe, do what he dislikes, or stay silent when he should speak, just to remain likable. At that point, validation is no longer optional. It's the condition for feeling like he matters. This isn't healthy connection. It's dependence. Stoic philosophy teaches that we must distinguish between what we can and we cannot control. Validation from others lies outside our control, and thus should never form the foundation of self-worth. Instead, we're urged to build a life rooted in right action, disciplined living, and fidelity to conscience, regardless of whether others notice or praise us. The man with stable inner worth doesn't need constant praise to feel enough. He can accept recognition calmly without inflating his ego, and accept rejection without collapsing. Because to him, worth is not assigned by others' reactions. It flows from integrity and consistency in how he lives. In short, when a man constantly seeks approval, it's not merely a sign of sociability. It's an indicator that he has yet to establish an internal value axis. According to Stoicism, true and sustainable growth only begins when a person learns to validate himself through right action, rather than wait for the world's recognition. We cannot pretend to be strong while our inner world remains chaotic and attached to others' validation. If we genuinely want to become attractive in a lasting and trustworthy way, this journey must begin within, not through social tactics or the skill of pleasing women. I've been lost before, reshaping myself just to be noticed by someone. But the more I tried to please, the smaller I became. That feeling taught me a deep truth. True attraction doesn't come from being chosen by others, but from no longer fearing what happens if we're not. We must return to personal discipline. Every time you feel the urge to apologize for something unworthy of guilt, pause and ask, what am I trying to avoid? Every time you're tempted to chase someone at the cost of your own path, remember that leadership only belongs to the one who knows where he's going. And every time you feel wounded by rejection, reflect on how much of your self-worth you've placed in someone else's hands. I'm not claiming change is easy, but if we patiently build inner strength through discipline, reason, and self-respect, then each passing day becomes less about chasing acceptance and more about returning to ourselves. If you found this content valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future videos. And always remember this: true freedom begins the moment you no longer need anyone's permission to be yourself. See you in the next video.